Hi everybody, this is Linda with Overbrook Quilt Connection. Today is day 19 of Moda's Stitch Pink, and our block today is called Tropicana. It is an orange peel type of block, which means you're making these petal shapes, and they have given you the template for the petal shapes in your pattern. You need to measure the 1-inch square on the template and make sure that your 1-inch square of your ruler matches all 4 lines of that square, so you know that your printer has printed it the right size and that your template will be the right size. Now this is the finished size. This is the finished size of your template. So we need to add 1/4 of an inch, and the stitching, the drawn line becomes our stitching line. Okay, so you also need 4 pieces. You need some fusible interfacing for this if you're doing this type of this method. Okay, so you will draw the you'll draw it on from your template onto the interfacing. Then you're going to cut it 1/4 of an inch bigger than that, at least 1/4 of an inch bigger than that. The same thing with your fabrics. Now, I chose to do some fussy cutting on some of mine, so I wanted to make sure that I had the same, design, that they would end up looking the same when they were done. So I wanted to fussy cut them. So when you do that, you need to have your template cut out of something clear so you can see through it. But I would suggest, if you're not fussy cutting anything, then I would suggest cardboard, or template plastic is always good, or some other kind of plastic. But if you're going to do fussy cutting, definitely you're going to need to see through to make sure that you're lining it up right. Okay, so the steps to this, and unfortunately I have all of mine done already, so I can't really show you the beginning. But when you lay your interfacing on, you're going to lay the fusible side, the bumpy, rough side, next to the right side of your fabric. And that seems counterintuitive because we're so used to doing right sides together, but you want the rough side, the fusible side, next to the right side of your fabric. Okay, then you're going to stitch around on that drawn line all the way around it, and then pull your interfacing away from your fabric so you don't cut your fabric. Put a little snip with your scissors, and then finish cutting through your part. Make yourself a good opening so you can turn it. When you turn it, I like to use, let me go back to one more tip on the sewing part. When you're sewing it, when you come down to your point, stop about 1 stitch before you, because normally, you would come down and just pivot and go right back up. If you'll go down and stitch 1 stitch over and then pivot and come back, that gives it a little more room for your fabric to lay in here in the points, and it makes them so much smoother. You don't have a little knob of fabric in the ends. It seems odd that you would stitch, it's like making a square, pivot, not a pointed pivot, but it makes a huge difference. Okay, when you turn them, I've got a couple of little turners that I like to use. This is that purple thing, and it's very inexpensive, and it actually has several different uses, but one of them is turning. And if you need one, you can always get one from Amy at Overbrook Quilt Connection. But I use it for turning, and since the interfacing is so flimsy, I try and keep my turning tool next to my fabric instead of next to my interfacing. Also, I neglected to tell you that I trimmed, I think you can see through the interfacing, I trim across the tip, and then I trim, I taper it out. So it's narrow, it's very narrow in those tips. Okay, so then when I turn it, I try to keep the tip of the turning tool next to my fabric, up on the top. So I am pushing out using the fabric side and not the interfacing side, because it's so easy to just stick right through that interfacing because it's so flimsy. Okay, then when I have that pulled out, if it doesn't easily push out as much as you want, I take a pin sometimes and stick it into the fabric, not into the interfacing, but into the fabric, and just pull that out a little bit to get it to where I want it, as pointy as I want it. Okay, then this is just an orange stick like you use for a manicure, and it has a beveled edge and it has a pointy end. Now the pointy end is really pointed. That purple thing is a little bit rounded and it's not quite so wicked as this. This is pretty pointed, but I use the beveled end. You could also use the beveled, the square end of that purple thing. Either one of them would work. But what I'm doing with it is I am going along my seam. And again, I'm doing it on the fabric. Sorry, that was my cat. One of my cats, she thinks she needs to be in my video. So anyhow, I'm just running it along the seam line. And what that's doing, it's pushing it out very smoothly and gives you a very smooth, rounded curves. Sometimes you don't even need to press it after that. But if you do, I recommend using an applique mat. And let me go get mine. This one's called the applique pressing sheet, and it's just a coated fabric of some sort. It's real slick. They also make silicone mats, but what they're designed to do is to not let your fusible stick to them when you press them, so then you can peel them off and the fusible will still stick when you go to place it on your fabric. So if you do need to press them, just use an up and down pressing motion. Make sure your fusible isn't hanging out of the, showing. Make sure that it's your fabric is all that's showing on top. And then press. Now with this one, you need to let it cool before you pick it up, because you could leave some of the fusible behind. With the silicone mats, I believe you can just peel them off right away. But anyhow. So we're ready to place them on our background. Now the background is just one big piece like it was with our Dresden quite a few blocks ago. But we are making do you see those folds, the diagonal folds? So you want to press it on the diagonal and then fold it again. So all your edges are lined up, and press it again on the diagonal. So you've got pressing on all 4 lines. Now, one other thing I did, instead of cutting this 12.5, I cut it 12 3/4. And the reason I did that was because if my machine would happen to draw up anything when I'm stitching my petals on, I want to have room to be able to square that back up again when I'm done. So I cut it 12.5 or 12 3/4 instead of the 12.5 that is in the pattern. So the lines are to put your petals down, and you line the tips up with the lines, so you know that you are putting it centered and that you're putting it on straight. Then so I've got all 4 of them laid out. You can decide whether you want them, completely touching each other in the middle, or if you want them spaced out a little bit, your choice. But then you'll need to stitch or you'll need to press them down first, fuse them down, but this is not a permanent fuse like a steam-a-seam or one of the permanent adhesives. This is just a temporary one to hold it in place while you're stitching around it. So, you can use a straight stitch if you want. You can use a blanket stitch. You can use some other type of decorative stitch. You can even stitch it down by hand if you want to. But you need to, you need to stitch it down. Okay, they've also shown us an alternate layout for this, and it is a circle, and you can still use those lines that you pressed in before because the tips of your petals will meet on those drawn lines. So let me get this laid out. Okay. So then again, it's your choice if you have them touch or if you leave them open a little bit. But here it is in the circle layout. So you decide how you want to lay that out. And again, you'll need to press them down, adhere them down, and then stitch around them. So I will do all that and I'll come back and show you the finished product. All right, the block is done. And if you cut your background to 12 3/4 or something other than 12 1/2, you will still need to square it up. So be sure you remember to do that. I just had this moment of clarity as I was stitching these on that mine are going to be farther apart than yours are. Yours are going, because I did mine wrong. I stitched 1/4 of an inch inside the line instead of on the line. So my petals are narrower than yours will be, and yours will meet much better in the center because the slope will be different than mine. But mine is what it is, and it's going to stay this way. And, as always, not all blocks can be perfect, but at least they're done. So this is block 19. I hope you have great luck with it. We'll see you back tomorrow. Thanks.